experience happened a few years ago when I was traveling solo. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most mundane of situations. As I reflect on that harrowing night, the memory still sends shivers down my spine. The sudden knock on the door, the slurred speech of the stranger, and the chilling sight of him brandishing a makeshift weapon. It all felt like something out of a nightmare. In that moment of terror, my instincts kicked in, propelling me to safety. Huddled in the bathroom, I listened to the chaos unfolding outside, praying for the arrival of the police. When they finally arrived, their authoritative voices cutting through the chaos, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The ordeal was over, and I emerged from my hiding place to survey the damage. The room was in shambles, a testament to the intruder's violent outburst. Yet, despite the destruction, I counted myself fortunate to have escaped unscathed. As I packed my belongings and sought refuge in a new room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the swift response of law enforcement. Their presence had provided a lifeline in my darkest hour. In the aftermath of that terrifying ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had enveloped me. It was a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and caution, especially when traveling alone. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was also a glimmer of resilience. I refused to let one nightmarish experience dictate my future travels. Instead, I resolved to carry on, armed with newfound awareness and a determination to stay safe on the road. As I drove away from that motel, the memories of that fateful night still fresh in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had survived the ordeal, and in doing so, had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. And though the scars of that night would linger, I refused to let them define me. For in the face of adversity, I had found strength, courage, and a renewed appreciation for the precious gift of safety and security. I turned, and I heard a faint thud as the man attempted to open the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my back against the door, fear coursing through my veins. How had he found me again? And what did he want? For a moment, I stood frozen in terror, listening intently for any sign of the man outside. But there was only silence, punctuated by the sound of my own ragged breaths. Slowly, cautiously, I tiptoed to the peephole, steeling myself for whatever might await on the other side. As I peered through the small opening, my blood ran cold. There he was, lurking in the dimly lit hallway, his eyes fixed on my door with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I knew that I was not safe, that this man posed a very real threat to my well-being. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling as I dialed the front desk. I needed help, and I needed it now. As I waited for someone to answer on the other end, my mind raced with a million questions. Who was this man, and what did he want with me? Had he been following me all along, watching my every move? Finally, a voice crackled through the receiver, and I wasted no time in explaining the situation. The person on the other end promised to send security up to investigate, but I knew that time was of the essence. Holding my breath, I listened as the footsteps outside my door grew fainter, the sound of the man's retreat echoing down the hallway. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Moments later, there was a knock at my door, and I jumped, heart racing as I cautiously approached. Through the peephole, I saw the familiar uniform of the hotel security guard, and I quickly opened the door, spilling out my harrowing tale. The security guard listened attentively, his expression grave as I recounted the events of the past few hours. He assured me that they would keep an eye out for the man and advised me to stay vigilant. As he left to continue his rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered like a shadow. Who was this man, and why was he so intent on following me? The questions swirled in my mind. But one thing was certain. I would never forget the terror of that night, or the realization that sometimes danger could be closer than we think. A while, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. What had prompted this stranger to target me? Was it simply a case of mistaken identity? Or was there something more sinister at play? As I went about my day, the memory of the encounter continued to haunt me, casting a shadow over what should have been a carefree trip. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man lurking in the shadows, his eyes fixed on me with that unsettling intensity. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the ease with which it could be shattered by the actions of others. And while I was grateful that the hotel staff and law enforcement had intervened, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been vigilant. In the end, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that lingered long after the stranger had been apprehended. It was a sobering reminder of the dangers that lurked in the world around us, hidden behind friendly smiles and seemingly ordinary facades. Yet, despite the lingering sense of unease, I refused to let fear dictate my actions. I was determined to continue exploring the world, even if it meant facing the occasional brush with danger. And so, with a newfound sense of resilience, I set out to make the most of the rest of my trip, determined not to let one unsettling encounter overshadow the memories I would make along the way. As I boarded the plane home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The ordeal was finally behind me, and while the memory would linger, it served as a reminder of my own strength and resilience in the face of adversity. And as I looked out the window at the world passing below, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head on, armed with the knowledge that I was capable of overcoming even the darkest of nights. In the end, it's the resilience forged in moments of adversity that defines us. As I reflect on that unsettling chapter of my journey, I'm reminded of the strength that lies within each of us, waiting to be called upon in times of need. Though the memory of that encounter may linger, I refuse to let it cast a shadow over the countless adventures that lie ahead. Instead, I'll carry it with me as a reminder of the importance of staying vigilant, even in the face of the unknown. And as I step forward into the unknown, I do so with a renewed sense of determination and a steadfast belief in my ability to navigate whatever challenges may come my way. For in the end, it's not the fear that defines us, but the courage to face it head on, ready to embrace whatever the journey may bring. Last year, I embarked on a road trip, cruising through unfamiliar landscapes with nothing but the open road ahead. But as night fell on the second day, I found myself in a bind, somewhere between nowhere and nowhere else, with no city lights on the horizon. I realized I needed a place to crash, The signal on my phone was spotty at best, and the prospect of finding a decent hotel seemed to dwindle with each passing mile. Eventually, around 11 o'clock at night, I stumbled upon a rest area and decided to make do. With a quick search on my phone, I discovered a motel about 12 miles down the road. Despite its remote location and the eerie vibe of the place, fatigue outweighed any concerns I had. The motel itself was straight out of a horror movie. Small, run-down, and almost deserted. Pulling into the nearly empty parking lot, I hesitated for a moment. Normally, I wouldn't even consider staying in such a place, but desperation coupled with exhaustion pushed me forward. Besides, at $29 a night, it was a steal, even if it did seem overpriced for what it offered. Entering the motel's dimly lit office, I was greeted by a man with a bushy beard who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. After exchanging pleasantries, I forked over the cash, received a room key, and made my way to my temporary abode. As I stepped inside, the reality of my situation sank in. The room was dingy, with ancient furniture and a TV that probably belonged in a museum, but I was too tired to care. I made a half-hearted attempt to settle in, hoping to catch a few hours of shut-eye before hitting the road again at the crack of dawn. But just as I was drifting off, a strange sensation washed over me. Opening my eyes, I glanced towards the window and caught a fleeting glimpse of someone lurking outside. My heart skipped a beat as I sprang out of bed and hastily drew the curtains shut. But the thin, threadbare fabric offered little privacy. Peering out into the darkness, I searched for any sign of the mysterious figure, but they had vanished into the night. With a shaky sigh, I crawled back into bed, attempting to shake off the unease creeping over me. However, sleep remained elusive, my mind plagued by the unsettling feeling of being watched. Each creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to amplify my paranoia. And then, just as I started to drift off again, I felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. With a sinking feeling, I turned towards the window, only to find, as I stood frozen in shock, the image of the man's face lingered in my mind, haunting me with its eerie familiarity. Hastily, I approached the window once more, scanning the darkness outside for any trace of the intruder, but he had vanished without a trace. With trembling hands, I locked the door and attempted to obscure the window as best I could, but the sense of unease lingered like a shadow. Returning to bed, I tried to dismiss the unsettling encounter and drift back into slumber. Yet, every creak of the aging floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, seemed to echo with the memory of that fleeting glimpse. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I slipped into a fitful sleep, haunted by half-formed nightmares. It was the sound of the door creaking open that jolted me awake once more. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I sat bolt upright, heart pounding in my chest. In the dim light, I watched in horror as a figure entered the room, their features obscured by the shadows. Panic seized me as I struggled to make out their identity. But before I could react, they bolted out the door and disappeared into the night. Only after the intruder had fled did I realize the chilling truth. It was the motel employee, the same man who had checked me in earlier. Fear coiled in my stomach as I hastily gathered my belongings, every instinct screaming at me to flee. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the door, desperate to escape the confines of that sinister place. As I peeled out of the deserted parking lot, relief flooded through me, mingled with a profound sense of dread. I drove until I reached the safety of a well-lit rest area, where I spent the remainder of the night huddled in my car, every shadow morphing into a potential threat. The following morning, shaken but determined, I reached out to the motel to report the harrowing encounter. Yet, my attempts were met with dismissal and hostility, leaving me with no choice but to turn to the authorities. With a trembling voice, I recounted the night's events to the police, hoping that justice would be served and that no one else would fall victim to that sinister motel employee's twisted intentions. Reflecting on the ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had engulfed me in that run-down motel room. It was a stark contrast to a previous solo trip I had taken a few years back, where the only concern was whether the hotel room had a decent Wi-Fi connection. Back then, in a bustling city far from home, I had checked into a standard hotel, blissfully unaware of the dangers lurking in the shadows. The room was basic but comfortable, a far cry from the dingy confines of the motel where my nightmare had unfolded. Settling into my routine, I had taken advantage of the downtime to catch up on work before venturing out into the city to explore. Immediately notified the front desk, recounting the unsettling experience. The hotel staff assured me they would contact the authorities, and I waited anxiously in the lobby until the police arrived. Despite the swift response, the mysterious intruder had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. As the police conducted a thorough search of the premises, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at my insides. Returning to my room, I was relieved to find my belongings untouched. Yet the knowledge that the intruder had breached my sanctuary left me on edge. Hours passed, the adrenaline of the encounter gradually fading, but the memory of the intruder's chilling presence lingered like a specter. Alone in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, my nerves frayed by the slightest sound. It was then, in the quiet stillness of the night, that I caught sight of him once more, peering out my window. I watched as the man skulked through the shadowy parking lot, disappearing into the darkness beyond, despite the urge to confront him or report his presence. Fear rooted me to the spot, paralyzed by uncertainty. For the remainder of my stay, I remained vigilant, double-checking locks and ensuring my window was tightly sealed against any potential intruders. Though the nights passed without further incident, the memory of that encounter haunted me long after I had checked out. Reflecting on the ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder about the man's motives and how he had gained access to my room. The unanswered questions lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the vulnerability that lurked behind closed doors. Yet, despite the lingering sense of unease, life went on, and I eventually found myself embarking on another journey, this time to a hotel on the outskirts of a bustling city. Settling into my room after a long day of travel, I had no inkling of the horrors that awaited me. Lost in exhaustion, I drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake by the sound of my doorknob turning. Confusion morphed into terror as I realized that someone was attempting to enter my room in the dead of night. With trembling hands, I crept towards the door, heart pounding in my chest, only to find, unsettled by the situation, I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole, hoping for some clarity. Yet the hallway remained empty, devoid of any signs of the mysterious intruder. With a shiver running down my spine, I hesitated for a moment before turning back towards the darkness of my room. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer of light emanating from the bathroom, casting eerie shadows across the room. In that moment of stark realization, I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I realized that I was not alone. Someone was lurking in the shadows, watching me from the confines of the bathroom. Panic surged through me, instinct driving me to flee from the unseen threat. Without a second thought, I flung the door open and bolted down the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. Racing down the stairs, I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the lobby, where I frantically recounted the harrowing ordeal to the bewildered front desk attendant. Together, we returned to my room, but the intruder had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the lingering scent of fear. With a shudder, I realized the gravity of the situation. I needed to get as far away from that room as possible. Requesting a new room on a different floor, I wasted no time in relocating my belongings, grateful for the chance to put some distance between myself and whatever unseen presence had invaded my space. As I settled into my new surroundings, a sense of unease lingered, overshadowing the rest of the night. Who was the mysterious figure lurking in the darkness? What were their intentions? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and unsettling. Looking back on the encounter, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had enveloped me in that dimly lit room. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, even in the seemingly safe confines of a hotel. Yet, despite the lingering sense of unease, I found solace in the knowledge that I had escaped unharmed, and as I drifted off to sleep in my new room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to start anew, leaving behind the unsettling memories of that fateful encounter.